year, we suggested to discuss at this webinar the question of how to address justice and sustainability together in urban governance. And before I'm going to explain a bit more how we want to spend the next 18 minutes, I'll remind you of the drivers, of the objectives that we've picked for this event, which are that we introduce the next phase of UrbanA, as you already introduced, that we start into discussions in 4 specific fields that we've identified to be very pertinent, that we want you to share your experience in governance arrangements that are aiming to foster sustainability and governance, sustainability and justice together in urban governance. And that, of course, we want to make this a continued debate and want to show you what we prepared for this kind of debate and how you can engage. So this directly relates to the agenda of this meeting. I'll have to first explain a few terms, how we use those terms, as they are not easy, or that it's possible to talk past each other if we are not defining these terms, and they might be, you might not feel familiar with some of them. Then we want to dive into 4 fields, 4 governance ambitions specifically, and want to discuss with you examples of that in the group discussion then, and then show ways of further engaging with us in this process in the upcoming months. So before, as it's not nice to say, to talk without saying who is talking, just have a look quickly at the team of Freiburg University and you'll meet all these people. And beyond these, we are also Michael Preganek in our team who cannot join today because he's teaching. But we all did prepare this conference together. So for the key terms, we are talking about governance repeatedly, and as many people do so, but it's not often easy to understand what people actually mean with it. We want to make sure that it's a broad process, like all the political process that leads to collective action that we want to look at. And not only what you might think of as policy or planning or decision making. These are important parts of governance, but they are not the whole. So by talking about governance, we want to make sure that we emphasize also different actors involved, not only state actors, governments, but also other actors who can play a leading role even in a governance process. And it's also informal and formal processes, and also like the questioning of problem framings, for example, all these processes that we want to integrate. And that's why we call it governance rather than just policy making, for example, or decision making. We emphasize governance arrangements often. We are talking about governance arrangements, and what we mean with that is that, for example, the different actors routinely interplay with each other in particular ways. So we want to stress here the more durable structures, the rules of the game, so to speak, rather than the individual interaction or the individual outcome in terms of a policy, for example. So these governance arrangements is what we want to look at in this coming phase. Now, after the phases that we have focused on drivers and approaches, for example. So now we want to emphasize really the procedural issues and the durable arrangements here. And these are important in our respect, or in this project, as they aim to address sustainability and justice together. So talking about justice, we need to define this as well. And our colleagues in Barcelona have done a very good job in elaborating this definition. I just want to mention that we look at a society to be just when the conditions allow for all humans to flourish. Like this would be the ambition. And if we look at the contemporary societies, we can identify like the way for improvements, as this is not really the case, as we see. So the justice is that that ambition to allow for all humans to flourish by the conditions given in the political system as well. We are very well aware that sustainability since the early 1990s is meant to include a societal dimension and justice as well as an ambition. But as we look at 30 years of debate on sustainability, we see that very, very often people refrain rather to a more autocratic understanding or technology-oriented understanding of what needs to be done in order for societies to be sustainable. And we feel the need to distinguish our usage here and to emphasize really that we talk about just sustainability, that we do not believe in the possibility to balance the Earth system without paying primary attention to the inequalities or injustices in societies. Like that, this is always a primary concern is what we want to stress by discussing just sustainabilities or the addressing of justice and sustainability together in urban governance. So just to reiterate the focus of the coming months in this project and hopefully in the dialogue with you, we want now to really emphasize the question of how actually sustainability and justice can be addressed. While before, like in the beginning of the project, for example, some may remember the first arena in Rotterdam, we also discussed the what can be done actually for sustainability, for just sustainabilities. Like, for example, if you strengthen public transport, you can allow people to reduce their ecological footprint and at the same time increase their well-being. However, what we want to focus on now is really the structural aspect of how actually these issues are addressed, how actors interplay in order to problematize things and find solutions. Like, for example, stressing the well-being of people over other sheer indicators of investments or competitiveness of cities. This kind of attention, if it's really institutionalized, if it's made durable as a rule, that is something that we would call the how of the governance process. So this broad question of how you can address sustainability and justice together in cities can of course be disaggregated. It's a very broad topic, and some ambitions with regard to such governance are particularly often addressed or gain a lot of attention recently. And we just name them: policy integration, bridging institutional logics, engaging inhabitants, and alternative metrics. And this list, of course, is not complete. It's just very pertinent or prominent debates that are going on. And we will introduce you quickly to these debates. My colleagues will do so in a minute from now, and we'll discuss later on. But of course, the question is, what other issues or governance ambitions do you know of, or do you consider important when it's coming to governance arrangements in cities for justice and sustainability?
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Jacob from the Freiburg team, and I'm excited to talk about our first governance ambition and topic for today, which is called policy integration or breaking down of silos. So what is it about? This ambition is really about dealing with sustainability and justice challenges in a more integrative and comprehensive way, rather than through compartmentalized policies or organizations. So it's really about these breaking down of silos. And this ambition is influenced by previous work done in UrbanA. For example, at the last arena, one specific driver of injustice that we talked about is called unfit organizational structures, which was driver number 6. And we talked about the breaking down of silos as one way to tackle that injustice. And some of you who have been part of UrbanA for even longer might remember the approach co-learning and knowledge brokerage that was discussed in the first arena, to which this governance ambition is also closely related. So these previous findings from UrbanA can also be found on the wiki. We're going to talk about that later as well. So even if you weren't part of these discussions previously, you can still find these insights online and contribute to them. So how could the breaking down of silos generally work? I think this could work through finding organizational structures and rules that really enable to look at sustainability related issues and justice related issues at once. So it's about always including questions of justice in urban sustainability planning procedures and policymaking as well. Maybe an example will tell you better what I mean by this. And one example of such an integrated development on the neighborhood or district level is the integrated planning of a drainage system in Augustenborg. It's part of a bigger regeneration project of the Augustenborg district called EcoStaden Augustenborg. And the bigger project aimed for different sustainability goals at once, for example, an increase in biodiversity or an increased resilience to climate change. And it was done through a participation process that was designed in a way that made residents co-responsible for certain parts of the project. And that proved really crucial and helpful in the process. How did this play out in the development of the drainage system? Which you can see on the right here. That's part of the drainage system. And in the end, the developed system was a nature-based solution that allowed for an increase in biodiversity while also making the neighborhood more resilient to floods. And this idea really came from the residents of the neighborhood who actively contributed to this and to even design some parts of these drainages. For example, kids from a local school were actively involved in this. So process-wise, it really tried to focus on justice aspects here, this planning process, while the outcome serves multiple goals at once as well. So it really combines the sustainability effects and goals with question of justice, and is therefore a really good example of such an integrated planning process. So the question that we can discuss in the breakout group, where you can bring in your knowledge, would be: what examples do you know where sustainability and justice concerns are addressed together through these integrated procedures? And we're going to discuss several sub-questions as well. We will talk about these later in the actual breakout groups. So far for our first ambition, I would say. And I would hand over to Roman now.
Hi everybody, I'm Roman and I'm going to present the second governance ambition, which is called Bridging Institutional Logic. So this governance ambition is about enabling different urban actors, from governments, civil society or enterprises, to better cooperate for sustainability and justice in their city. So now we are going to see how it relates to previous work done in UrbanA project. On the next slide. This ambition addresses some drivers of injustice which have been identified in previous work packages. It tackles again, as Jacob already mentioned, unfit organizational structures, referring to some administrative aspects that stand in the way of achieving just outcomes in urban sustainability. It also addressed the drivers called weakened civil society, referring to ways in which citizens' initiatives are constrained by interventions that carry sustainability objectives. This is the driver number 10. Besides, if we go back to some approaches previously developed at the first arena, bridging institutional logic touches upon an approach which is called co-learning and knowledge brokerage. And the objective here is to facilitate in cities the circulation of ideas, understanding, and cutting-edge research between diverse urban actors. So now, how could our governance ambition work? Well, bridging institutional logic could consist of creating organizational structures and rules that support cooperation across different institutional logic of government, civil society, or enterprises. For instance, knowledge brokerage could be used to foster mutual understanding or helping actors or social groups to identify a jointly held concern. Such structures or rules could ensure that policies are developed jointly. Going into an example of this governance arrangement ambition, I'd like to present the joint planning for a model district in Freiburg-Vauban. So for co-creating a truly desired and sustainable neighborhood, a joint working group consisting of city councillor and civil officers and local parliamentarians and civil society individuals or organizations was set up. The joint working group was in charge for discussing and covering the visioning and planning aspects, as well as implementing a sustainability-oriented urban development project. The core reduced mobility concept of the neighborhood is a prime example of this successful joint planning. The idea of this mobility concept was developed early on by a civil society organization called Car Free Living that established a contractual agreement with local residents. Then the removal of cars from the district was enabled by paying an annual fee for creating and maintaining dedicated parking lots, as well as developing alternative mobility infrastructures, including bicycle lanes or city trains, as you can see here in the picture. So this mobility concept was very positively welcomed by city planners and enforced by the municipality at the level of the district. We can see here that such governance arrangement, reaching across institutional logic, was used again regarding later district development in the city of Freiburg. And this led into a question to discuss in breakout groups, which is where and how did people from government, civil society organizations, and enterprises cooperate particularly well with each other to the benefit of justice and sustainability in a city. So now Nadia is going to present the next governance ambition.
Thank you very much, Roman. Hello, everyone. My name is Nadia, and thanks for joining us today. Now I would like to present to you our third governance ambition, that is about engaging inhabitants or citizens' participation in sustainability interventions. So the ambition aims to enable local inhabitants to better participate in decision-making around planning, design, implementation, and evaluation of urban development or urban sustainability-oriented interventions. In UrbanA's recent big event, I mean in Arena 2, limited participation of inhabitants in urban planning or tokenistic participation, which is a driver of injustice, has been thoroughly discussed with some strong examples. One of the takeaways from the Arena 2 about the driver was that the urban planning without citizens' participation is likely to leave out crucial sustainability and justice concerns and therefore impact long-term success or credibility of the intervention. So participation is principally easier for some groups and more difficult for others, which usually leads to biases in representation. If enabled to participate more effectively, citizens could bring in their justice concerns together with other preferences into productive deliberations. Now the question is how and what governance intervention can enable effective participation of inhabitants in urban development. There could be many ways. Some to my knowledge are by adopting participation methods that could make people's justice concerns visible, giving particular attention to marginal and vulnerable groups in a locality, diversifying participation options such as using digital tools, web pages, and social media platforms, and being sensitive about language barriers, and by offering compensations for participation. So in this regard, the example I would like to share is about the Superblock program in Barcelona. It is a municipality-led city development intervention aiming to increase habituality of citizens on the streets of Barcelona. That means less cars and more people on streets, children playing around, and a friendly environment for people's interaction. One of the aims for achieving the goal of the intervention is by promoting public participation and joint responsibility. They aim to open up the process as far as possible and ensure participation. The citizen participation happens at neighborhood level. The citizens are involved through a participatory process. Some of the elements of the process include presentation of the Superblock program, participatory diagnosis in each Superblock area, open workshops, and they work with different groups, and they propose the proposal to the proposal that developed together to the citizens, and finally they implement the proposal together and monitor it also. So over the course of the project, participation has become increasingly open and informal as it has been adapted according to concerns shared by citizens. The intervention practices the sharing of meeting minutes of public meetings and deliberative process on the websites of municipality for transparency. The question I would like to ask you for your inputs later in the breakout groups is, what processes and tools of inhabitants engagement do you know that fostered inclusivity and justice in urban sustainability governance? Thank you. Over to you, Sophia.
I think you're muted, Sophia.
Thank you. Good to have friends. Okay, who will tell you when you're muted? I'll repeat what I said. My name is Sophia. It's nice to see you guys all here today. And I'm going to briefly talk about our final governance ambition for sustainable and just cities. And as you can see on the screen, this is, it's called Alternative Metrics of Well-Being. So the idea here is that the creation and the use of certain alternative metrics can actually guide urban development and policies towards sustainability and well-being. And by alternative metrics, we mean those that expand on or even challenge classic economic growth-oriented measures such as GDP, job growth, wage growth, and so on. And in doing so, they search for other ways to define progress in cities or problems in cities, among other things. So tying this back to UrbanA findings from our past arena in June, we looked at a driver of injustice called unquestioned neoliberal growth and austerity urbanism. And this means the prioritization of economic growth over other objectives such as sustainability or social welfare. And we think that the concept of alternative metrics could address this driver of injustice and shift the narrative towards sustainability and well-being. Additionally, UrbanA has previously explored the approaches of beyond GDP indicators, as well as financial practices and instruments, which both position current economic systems and their measurements as problematic for sustainability and equality in cities. So how could this work? What's the idea behind it? Giving more serious consideration to alternative metrics really can help us realize, that there are many ways to understand a city. And the way that we choose to collect and frame knowledge on it is actually quite subjective and political, even though we might not realize it. And this is because certain concerns, interests, and values are made more visible through measurement and reporting, while others are obscured. And so in this way, alternative metrics can help make visible the elements of true well-being in cities and could enable city makers to address them accordingly because they're now visible. Now, it's always good to think critically, and maybe some challenges for this ambition could include the cost of development and implementation of alternative metrics could be prohibitive. And also, because they're likely to challenge the status quo, they might be less likely to be accepted by those in power. So maybe it's something just to discuss in your rooms later and think about. In the breakout rooms is what I mean. So for a quick example of an alternative metric, We have the Fair Urban Greening Index, which some of you might have heard about already, because it's currently being developed by the Barcelona Lab for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability, an UrbanA partner. And what it does is it looks at gentrification and exclusion in relation to urban greening projects. And so with this index, they are doing a cross-city comparison to analyze which of their cities are most equitably distributing the benefits of greening. So this is quite compelling because it has the potential to impact social and racial dimensions of sustainability planning in the future. I can post a link to the Fair Urban Greening Index in the chat in a moment. So leading into our question for breakout rooms, we are really wondering and curious to hear if you know any examples of efforts to guide urban policies by measuring aspects of sustainability and justice, or on the flip side of this, if you know of any problematizations of our reliance on metrics of growth and competitiveness. So we'll leave that to discuss in the breakout rooms, and I'll hand it back over to Philip.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, team. And